Hello there, I'm Tanya, and you are listening to Human and Holy. And today we are going to do such a fun thing together, which is take a deeper look at one of the sources that was mentioned on a podcast episode that you all loved, which was the episode with Rivki Kaplan. It's called The Feminine Spirit, a Rising Force. And in it, Rivki references two talks from the Lubavitcher Rebbe, one about Dina and one about Chana. And she juxtaposes how these two women and these two models of women are something that many women live with in their lives, balancing both the Dina character and the Chana character. And the Dina character represents this outgoing woman who leaves her home to have an impact on her environment. And Chana represents this woman who stays home, who chooses to turn her attention inward into her family unit. And how we go through seasons of our lives, sometimes when we are more invested in the Dina elements and sometimes more invested in the Chana elements. And we had a beautiful conversation that sprung of those two sources. So today, what we are going to be doing is zooming in on that Dina talk from the Lubavitcher Rebbe, speaking about this outgoing woman, this woman who is tasked and called to really show up to lead in the world in a really meaningful way. What is the source for this in the Torah? And how did the Lubavitcher Rebbe, in this incredible talk, flip a story that was often seen as honestly victim shaming for Dina, who left her home to converse with the woman of the city and was taken advantage of by Sichem, and showcases how Dina was going out to have an influence on the world. And this is a very famous talk of the Lubavitcher Rebbe that kind of lays some of the groundwork for the Lubavitcher Rebbe's perspective on Jewish women and what it meant to really show up in leadership positions in the world outside of the home, in positions of influence, in a way that did not change the deeper appreciation that Judaism has for unique feminine qualities, but rather asked and called women to take who they were naturally and to show up and lead with that voice, with that internal self, with their most authentic voice and tone and way of being in the world, in those positions of leadership and influence. Now, in many ways, I find this concept to be obvious, and maybe in no small part due to the shifts that the Lubavitcher Rebbe brought to the way that the Orthodox community sees the role of a Jewish woman. But regardless, I think we do live in a society that really does value the contributions of everyone, man and woman, and asks us to step into our power and our light in terms of being an influence and a source of good to the people around us. But what I find so unique and insightful about the Rebbe's vision for this, and specifically in this talk where he analyzes the paradigm of Dina, is the way that he showcases the cost of not showing up when you have that ability. And that when you have the potential for something, you are holding onto a potent force that cannot remain unused and innocent and idle in your life. And there's a lot here on the how of showing up. How do we choose to show up in the world? How is that going to be unique for every single person? What does it mean to show up as a woman, to own your womanhood in the way that you show up? There's a lot of richness and depth in the text. And what I'm going to be doing today is I'm not going to read the text inside, but I am going to be following the order that the Lubavitcher Rebbe takes these ideas to stay as true to the original text and source as possible, as well as adding my own thoughts on it. And I'm going to be including the source in the show notes. So I definitely encourage you, if you are connected to this or feel inspired, go deeper and you can learn this for yourself and have your own thought processes that might be sparked from seeing the Lubavitcher Rebbe's words inside on this story of Dina. Now let's begin with the pasuk, the verse from the Torah that we are analyzing, which is a verse about Dina, which reads, Vatetze Dina bas Leah, asher yelda liYaakov, liros bivnos haaretz. Dina, the daughter of Leah, who was born to Yaakov, went out to visit the daughters of the land. And the next following pasuk says, Sichem, the son of Hamor, saw her and took her and lay with her and disgraced her. So Dina chose to leave her home to visit the daughters of the land, and every girl's worst nightmare. A man saw her, wanted her, and took her for himself. And in the Rashi on this verse, Rashi comments on how Dina was called the daughter of Leah. This is not a mistake. Obviously, every single word in the Torah is very intentional and has a lot to teach us. Why was Dina called the daughter of Leah? Why specifically in this context of hearing that Dina went out of her home to visit the daughters of the city? Why is she called the daughter of Leah? Not only is she called the daughter of Leah, but we see somewhat of a redundancy. If we're trying to place Leah in her family line, saying that she's the daughter of Leah, and then also adding that she was born to Yaakov seems to be a lot more information than we need. And Rashi explains that Dina is called the daughter of Leah because Leah too went out of her home. Leah too was an outgoing woman. And why is Yaakov roped into this story is because Leah went out to greet Yaakov. She went out to arouse his desire to be with her, and a child was born of this initiation that she did, which was to go out and greet Yaakov and to arouse his desire to be with her. And Rashi says, like mother, like daughter. Just as Leah was a woman who left her internal environment to go outward to affect positive change and to be proactive, Dina too, as her daughter, inherited this ability and this desire to leave her home and to go outward and to have an impact on the world. But in the way that I'm talking about I'm already incorporating the Lubavitcher Rebbe's insights into this story. But actually, we see that in the following verse, Dina is defiled and seems almost to be punished for the fact that she dared to leave her home. So when we say that she's the daughter of Leah and we almost blame this unseemly character trait that Dina had, which was this desire to leave her home, and we blame it on Leah, it seems to be highlighting a character flaw in Leah. And we know that the Torah is so careful not to speak badly even about a non-kosher animal. So how can we bring in a woman, a matriarch, to put her down and to say, you see how Dina was punished for going out? Well, it's not her fault. She learned that from her mother. She learned that from Leah. And you could say that we are just trying to highlight how it wasn't really Dina's fault, how like mother, like daughter, Leah led her astray, so Dina learned that this was okay and she was punished. But this is not really a satisfying reasoning for why we would put Leah down, because are we really going to be putting down Leah, our matriarch, in order to lift Dina up? Are we going to absolve Dina of her responsibility by saying that it was only because she didn't know better, because she inherited this terrible trait from her mother? There's clearly something deeper going on in this story. There's clearly something more happening that isn't as simple as Dina erred, left her home, and was punished and was defiled. When we look at the original reason why Leah left her home, we see that this was actually a move that was praised. And in the fact that Leah's move of leaving her home was caused the birth of a shevet, of a child, is proof to us of Yisachar, is proof to us that what she did was a positive thing. And so therefore, when we say like mother, when Rashi says like mother, like daughter, he's not excusing Dina. He's not blaming Leah for Dina's actions. He's saying, you see the way we praise Leah for going out? You might think that Dina left her home and erred and did a sin and made a mistake. But no. Like mother, like daughter, she went out for pure reasons, with pure intentions, and she did the right thing. The Torah teaches us that Yaakov put Dina in a chest when he went to see his brother Esav, because he didn't want Esav to lay his eyes on her and want to marry her. And in this text, the Rebbe says, had Esav married her, maybe Dina would have been able to transform him. But because Yaakov locked her away, because he did not want Esav to set his eyes on her, she fell into the hands of Shechem. And even here, it can seem like we're going a little hard on Yaakov. Yaakov is simply just trying to protect his daughter from his evil brother and does not want her to be taken. But the lesson here is that we see that Dina had such great powers of influence that she could have even transformed Esav, who was wicked. And even more than that, that even just the potential of transformation that she had, the fact that she may have been able to transform him, because there's no guarantees when it comes to another person. Yaakov could have never known for certain if she could certainly transform him. But even just the potential for transformation, even just the fact that she may have been able to change his mind, change his heart, change his way of seeing. Even just that was reason enough for her to be exposed to this wickedness, to Esav, because she may have had the potential and the power to transform him. And I want to zoom into this point for a moment about protecting other people from their own potential and Yaakov's desire to lay his daughter in a chest so that the wicked would not lay their eyes on her, because he was afraid that she may be corrupted, because he was afraid that she would not be able to live up to her potential, and to see the cost of that in Dina's life. And in our own lives, I think that this is something that we naturally may feel, which is this rising fear when we see our own or other people's potentials. And first, I want to start with the way we see other people as teachers, as parents. When we see a child or a student or someone in our life that we have some type of leadership or agency over has a very strong voice or a very strong sense of potential or a very strong ability to lead and influence, and we see them approaching the murkier waters of transformation, which is not the straight path, which is not so clear, which is not so direct, which is not so black and white, and our instinct is to take our precious cargo, our beautiful souls, and put them in a chest and hide them. And this is the instinct of a righteous person. And this is a very well-meaning instinct. And this is the instinct of Yaakov. But what is the cost of stuffing our most talented, strong, influential students and children into the chest? What is the cost of wanting to manage their journeys to such an extent that we hide them from the evils and the nuances of the world? Because something that I think we all, and I do, find so uncomfortable and tricky is that in order to transform, you have to touch the edge. In order to transform, you have to walk into the world. In order to transform, you cannot remain perfectly pure. You have to step out of the chest. You have to walk towards Esav. You have to walk almost straight into the line of fire, outside of the safety and confines, not just of your home, but of your community and of your safe space, and begin to interact with other people and other ways of seeing, and to truly enter into the chutza, the outside. And this is the only way to actually step into our voices and our potential and our leadership and our positions of influence and our talents. And when we see that in our children, when we see that in our students, our instinct may very naturally be to hide them away and to protect them from this exposure and protect them from this path of interacting head to head, of marrying potentially Esav, wickedness, because there's just a potential that they will be able to transform. And to stop ourselves when we feel that desire to protect and ask ourselves what the cost is of protecting potential, what the cost is of protecting purity at the expense of potential transformation. And there is always a risk when we enter into the world. There's always a risk when we encounter evil. There's always a risk when we encounter anything outside of the bounds of our homes, of our communities, of our safe and godly spaces. There is always a risk, but the risk of squashing that potential is so much greater. The risk of stuffing ourselves or our students or our children into a chest is so much greater, because the cost of stolen potential, the cost of squashed power of influence is so much greater than what we could ever know. And you may find this and see this in people you know, in your students, in your children, in yourselves, the way that that potential that you have inside of you to be a voice, to have influence, to walk outside of your home, to touch the world, to impact the world, to transform darkness. When it is not used, it becomes a leaking energy within your own self. And ultimately, what happens for Dina is that she does become defiled, not because she went out, but because Yaakov sought to protect her from her own nature and her own incredible transformative ability to walk out into the world and change the way people saw and felt about divinity. So she wasn't punished for leaving her home. She was punished for Yaakov's mistake of trying to protect her from her own potential. Every single one of us has natural talents and gifts and abilities, and very often we have this instinct for ourselves and the people we love to curb that. And if anything, when we see a bright light within others and within ourselves, I think that's when we become even more afraid and even more protective. And we have even more of a desire to put ourselves in a chest, to put our precious children into a chest, to hide it away, because we know this light is so bright. And if it works, and if this potential is realized, this is going to change the world. But if it isn't, this bright light is going to be wasted and consumed by the darkness. And that fear of the potential not being realized, of being corrupted, has us hiding it away for fear of what will happen if it does not actually come to the fore in the way that it could. But the potential itself is reason enough to take the risk. And we see that Yaakov curbing that potential, not letting Esav see her, not letting her step into her destiny, which was to touch the darkness and transform it, to leave the internal space, to leave the perfectly righteous space of her father's home, of Yaakov's home, of a pure tzaddik, and to enter into the darkness of the world and to be a force of light. And because of Yaakov's fear in this area, because he did not know if she would be able to step into that full potential, Dina was punished, not because of Leah going out, not because she went out, but because her light, in trying to be protected, was actually squashed. And through that, Yaakov was punished by having his dear, precious daughter and light actually be defiled and actually be corrupted. And I think a big piece here is that when Dina was being hidden, Yaakov was reacting to the darkness of the world and trying to protect the light that he saw within his daughter. But when Dina went out into the world, when we go out into the world, this is a proactive act, which is not reacting to our fears about the darkness, but is actually stepping into it with a mission and a charge and a vision for what we want to do here. And when you walk out into the darkness with a mission, when you walk out with a vision, when you walk out because you step foot outside of your home, that certainty and that sense of orientation and purpose is not only what's going to protect you, is what's going to guide you and lead you and allow you to show up in the spaces and in the world that is imperfect, that is complicated, that could touch you, that could taint you, that could have you losing your innocence, and to show up as a voice and to show up as someone that shifts the atmosphere, that shifts the environment instead of being shifted by it. But when we are reacting to the darkness of the world, when we are seeing it coming towards us, as Esav was walking towards Yaakov and he decided to hide his daughter into a chest, and we are reacting and trying to stay hidden, that's when the darkness can actually touch us because we are reacting to it. We don't see ourselves as being influencers who have this ability to lead and change the darkness and touch the world, and to look at the world around us, not in a matter-of-fact way of this is how it is, but to say, I'm going to walk in here and I'm going to change the energy. My job here is to change the energy, to see what I have to offer in this space and to walk in there proactively, to leave my home with a vision and a clear voice and a strong sense of who I am. I do think that this concept, just this micro point in the talk, is so deep and holds so many lessons for how we look at our most gifted, and specifically here where we are speaking about women, and especially when we live in a society and we live with Torah values that does really value the internal work and often how that expresses for a woman in her home. So there is so much space for us to not want to go there, to let's just focus on what's going on inside and let's emphasize the internal space that a woman has so much influence in. But the Lubavitcher Rebbe says, no. When you have a Dina, when you are a Dina, when you have a part of a Dina inside of you, all of us have so many elements and many of us hold a little bit of this voice inside of us. If you have that voice within you, you are being called by something beyond yourself. Go visit the women of the land. It wasn't her leaving her home. It was her father hiding her and not believing in the power of that risk that he would take in letting her walk out in that position of influence to touch the world. Let's look at the influence of Yaakov and Leah in Dina's life for a moment. In this piece, the Alter Rebbe is quoted as saying that Yaakov's soul comprised all the souls of the Jewish people, and that this is why our nation is called Am Yisrael, the nation of Yisrael. Yisrael is another name for Yaakov, because within Yaakov is contained the entire Jewish people, but the unique defining characteristics of the Jewish people are still undefined within Yaakov. And those were expressed through the patriarchs, because the different levels of the Jewish people were revealed through the 12 tribes. And if you look at the way that a child is conceived, the father gives a seed, gives the essence, gives this point of a person's existence, and the mother gestates that seed and creates the organs and the limbs and the entire expression of that person in this world. Yaakov holds the essence of Klal Yisrael and the matriarchs and the tribes who were birthed and created and cultivated and developed through the matriarchs, is where we see this development of unique characteristics and expressions and different avenues and channels that the Jewish people take. And this is why the matriarchs were the ones who chose the names for their children, because names represent a deep sense of identity that is expressed differently in every single child, which is something that came about through the mother. There are 12 tribes, there are 12 paths, and each of them have a little bit of a different angle and avenue. But if we want to really narrow it for a second, which is what we do in this text, we can say that there are two essential paths. The the path of the tzaddik and the path of the Baal Teshuvah. And the path of the tzaddik is the path of the righteous person, the path of the person who works within the realm of holiness, who does not go out to touch the darkness of the world and transform it, but rather works within the Torah and the mitzvos and everything that is holy to serve Hashem from that holy and pure space. The other path is the path of the Baal Teshuvah. The Baal Teshuvah is someone who enters into the world, and I would say that all of us likely fall into this category. It is the path of the struggling person. It is the path of the person who leaves and returns, the path of the person who touches darkness and seeks to transform it, and sometimes gets dirty in the struggle, and sometimes gets messy in the struggle, and sometimes gets tainted in the process. This is the path of the Baal Teshuvah, and Rachel represents the path of the tzaddik. Rachel was the beautiful one, the one that Yaakov loved. Yaakov loved the path of the tzaddik. Yaakov was the path of the tzaddik. Yaakov loved the path of purity and holiness and pure righteousness. Leah represents the path of the Baal Teshuvah. We say about Leah that she had sensitive eyes because she cried, and tears are associated with the Baal Teshuvah's sense of returning, of a complicated existence and identity. And because this was Leah's ability, she was destined to marry Esav, but she resisted this part of who she was. She wept until she changed her destiny. She did not want to marry Esav. She resisted this concept, but it was then expressed in her daughter more fully. Her daughter who did have the courage to express that part and that piece and that path of life, which is a lot more complicated and a lot less simple, but she had it expressed more fully within her identity and more of a drive to really fulfill that. She didn't say, I don't want to marry Esav. She said, I want to go out into the city. I want to talk to the woman of the land. Just to settle here for a second, I think it's such an insightful piece about how sometimes traits or talents or abilities or desire to go out and influence is inherited from the women that came before us, but maybe wasn't fully expressed within them or within their lives fully, but every generation kind of like draws it down more fully and expresses it more fully. And it's a beautiful thing to think about how this trait of a Jewish woman to go out and influence and lead is actually something that we are inheriting from the women that came before us, even if they were not showing up in the way that women of this generation have the ability to, just because we just live in such a different world and like so much has shifted over time that does give women more opportunity to like express this natural potential, but to just like recognize and celebrate how this is inherited from the women that came before us. And maybe we're having the opportunity to express it now in today's day and age, but this is part of our story. This is something that we got from our mothers and grandmothers and great-grandmothers. This is the inheritance of the Jewish woman, of the bloodline of Jewish women that have this path of being a Baal Teshuvah, of touching the world, of influencing, of going out, of not being contained simply within the home, but actually having this drive and this ability and this potential and talent to influence and make a difference in this world in a very tangible way. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe ends, as he does in these talks, with a lesson directed to Jewish women. And he says, Jewish women, if you have the ability, if you have the potential, if you have the gift of influence and leadership and talent and the ability to influence the way people see, then you are being called to use this potential. Do not put yourself into the chest. Leave your home. Go out and speak with the women of the city. And this piece, L'Shem Shamayim, for the sake of heaven, is everything to me. I think this is a core piece and teaching that can guide us in knowing how we want to show up and to really hold a clear vision and sense of our why and our purpose in being in positions of influence and leadership. And when it comes to Jewish women really stepping into these roles, it's so interesting because there's so much cultural conversation around this, around Jewish women's leadership and what it means and what it should look like and what names it should take on. And I think it's very different for every community and every space. And I don't think that there's one way. And I do think that this vision, this L'Shem Shamayim, for the sake of heaven, holding that truly as our guidepost and our direction of being, I am leaving, I'm walking out. Yes, we as women have a different call in today's generation than we ever did in the past. We can admit that things are changing and shifting historically and certainly within the Jewish and Orthodox community, and it's for a reason, and it's because we are walking towards redemption, and we are being called, like Dina, to flip the story on its head, saying no. It wasn't leaving and going out into the world. It was resisting and staying back from the world and not stepping into our voice and not owning the fact that we have something to offer and to take the risk, because it is a risk, but trusting that if I'm doing this l'shem shamayim, if I'm doing this for the sake of heaven, then hopefully I will be able to navigate these waters in a way that is truly true to the intent of transforming the world for the good. Kol kvuda bas melech panima is also referenced. The glory of the king's daughter is within, which is often something that was used, and I saw this in a different talk from the Lubavitcher Rebbe actually, which is when the Rebbe kind of flips the whole concept of panima on its head and says, in the past, panima meant staying home, being internal, not being in positions of leadership or external influence, but in today's day and age, because we live in a different time, because women live in a different headspace, because the world is different, because we are moving towards redemption, internal that is connoted here means showing up externally in an internal way. So the Rebbe literally flips the meaning of this phrase to say, it doesn't mean staying inside. It doesn't mean staying in the shadows. It doesn't mean not showing up to lead. It means showing up externally in an internal way, showing up to influence and lead in a pneumistic way. It means working truly from the inside out. And I think this is a very core piece that many women intrinsically know how to do, which is to operate without, to be in a public sphere, operating from within, with a strong sense of personal alignment and connection to ourselves and intuition and a strong internal root that everything is coming from, and whatever we are giving being a reflection of an internal space that we have worked through and processed and journeyed with ourselves. So we are being called to show up panima, internally, to be external in an internal way, to be external in a way that reflects on the internal space that we are in a way that offers something that is so clearly a reflection of a very deep pneumistic space inside of us. And the text continues to say that the feminine traits of sensitivity and connection enable women to succeed in drawing people's hearts closer to the service of God to a greater degree than men. The Rebbe quotes the sentence from Rashi that says a man's tendency is to conquer, and says that we can be more successful and have a more internalized and lasting effect on people when we approach our influence in a pleasant and welcoming way. And I think what the Lubavitcher Rebbe is doing here is really creating permission and space to show up externally in a way that feels very authentic to who we are, and to rewrite the rules of influence and leadership, which, by the way, I see our culture doing, and it is stunning, and I love it, and I think it's indicative of a spiritual shift, which is that we are rewriting the rules of influence and leadership. Female CEOs who are talking about how they feel that as women, they have a stronger sense of emotional intelligence that is what is driving their company forward. And they are owning that ability and that sense that they have of emotional intelligence. And instead of trying to mimic another way of doing it, they're actually leaning into a more intuitive sense of influence and leadership and using that to drive their businesses forward. And now I absolutely know and hear from people who say, I don't relate to these feminine traits of connection, of sensitivity, of emotional intelligence, and that's not my unique way of showing up in the world, of influencing, of leading. And I really think that when the Rebbe is speaking to Jewish women, he is speaking to every single Jewish woman, and that includes you, whatever your traits are, whatever your natural way of being is. What I think the invitation here is not to stuff ourselves into another box of what we think femininity is and should be, but to actually trust who we are and to show up from a real, internal, genuine, authentic, connected space, and not to try to mimic any other way of being, and to really recognize that you, whoever you are, you as an individual, be it more traditionally feminine or non-traditionally feminine, you as an individual can rewrite the rules of influence. You can work from a personal sense of passion. You could rewrite the rules of leadership. You could rewrite the rules of what it means to show up in the world. You can just actually show up as who you are authentically and lead from that space. I think that's the shift that we are seeing, and I'm seeing this in male leaders too, which is more of an appreciation for this authentic way of leading, of not fashioning yourself into a position or into a box, but actually just being who you are and doing that intentionally and with vision and with dignity, but also just leaning into that natural sense of self. And that is what it means to show up in a way that is connected and intuitive and is pnima, which is that I show up externally in a way that does not seek to fit into someone else's box of what it means to be a leader, what it means to lead a company, what it means to be a working mom, what it means to show up with my gifts and lit up and sharing my voice with the world, but actually like kind of rewrites the story by just reading what's happening already inside. Who are you? What do you have to offer? What are your natural gifts? What is the Dina within you? What is her call? Is it leadership? Maybe. Is it starting the business that you've been dreaming of because you really feel that you have like something to offer in that area? It could be that. Is it sharing your writings with the world? It could be that. Is it just investing in your writing? It could be that. What is that Dina voice inside of you? Like, what is that potential that you have? What is that raw potential that you have? And how can you begin to nurture that, trusting that the cost of stuffing it away is too high? Even if it's so underdeveloped right now, even if you haven't had the opportunity in your life to nurture that part of yourself, can you invest in that tiny knowing just a little bit? Can you recognize what is sparkling inside of you and take it seriously? When that part of ourselves is underdeveloped, which it can often be, and I don't just think that this is because of the busyness of life. I think sometimes there is a cultural element around Jewish womanhood, sometimes, unfortunately, and I hate to say it, where you can be socialized to only be focused on the pnima and the home. And I do feel that as Jewish women, as part of a greater collective, we do have a responsibility to show up not just internally for our homes, not just to be the foundation of the home, but to actually say we as Jews have a responsibility, are called to show up and influence and change this world. And can you imagine if every woman rose up into that natural voice that they had in their own individual way? And it will not look the same for any two people. But could you imagine if every woman rose up to this call, to this Dina voice inside of her, if every woman began to develop that sense, that like little niggling intuition they have about areas where they may be so underdeveloped, but they want to give. And I'll give an example of that is if you feel this like glimmer around teaching Torah, but you feel like you don't feel developed in this area and you don't feel like a scholar and you don't feel like you have much to give, can you honor that maybe there's a potential here for you to grow into a real knowing of the Torah that will give you enough to be able to give to others? I think something that can be very helpful, like in The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron, she speaks about how blocked artists often befriend artists and feel so drawn to art, and they love visiting art museums and they love absorbing it and they love receiving it from other people, often because they are blocked in an area where they actually want to give. And if you find yourself being absorbed within spaces where you kind of have the sense of, if I was more developed, I could do this, I would wager that that is the call of your soul nudging you towards that Dina voice that you have, which is saying you could develop this part of yourself. If the only thing stopping you is the fact that you have not developed it yet, is the fact that it's just this like intuition in the sense of, I might be good at that. I think I'd be great at that. I might have something to offer here. Take the risk of beginning to develop that part of ourselves. And something that is just an unfortunate truth of life is that unused potential, as we see with Dina, led to the most catastrophic ends. And within ourselves, I think unused gifts also begin to leak negative energy in our life in a way that can really rot away at the foundation of our like sense of self, ourselves within our Judaism. And also if we are weaponizing our role within the home against our ability to show up in the world, then I think that it will begin to rot the foundation of the home because it's being used as a front and a cover. It's being used as that chest that Yaakov used to hide Dina from Esav. It's being used to hide you away, to hide your light away. And even though that is such a huge core piece, we are building the next generation through the family unit. And I do not discount that. And in another episode, we could explore motherhood and the role of being really invested in the Jewish home and how powerful that is. And I do think that that is the foundation of the Jewish world and the Jewish future and Jewish continuity. And our role within that is so important and significant. And that's what, back to the beginning of why I even brought in this source, Rifki speaks about being able to juxtapose and hold both Dina and Chana in our lives, the woman who really invests in her family life and the woman who shows up and really takes her outward responsibility very seriously. I do think we have to be sensitive to the ways that we may be using our role as Chana, as mother, as a chest to hide ourselves from our own potential, to remain underdeveloped, of not answering the call that we feel stirring in our chests to give to the world, to walk out and speak to the woman of the city, to be in a position of influence, to shine our talents, to develop who we are. You are Dina. You have a Dina within you. The world needs your voice. The world wants your voice. It is only through every single person. I truly believe this with all my heart and soul. When every single person, and obviously this talk is speaking to women, so specifically women, when women find their voice, when women own their voice, when women own their abilities, when you begin to develop this voice and this sense of who you are and what you want to offer and how you want to influence the world around you, when we all rise up into that voice, can you imagine how stunning this world is going to be? Can you imagine if every woman was able to lean into that sense of self? That's the vision that I hold for the world. That's the vision that I hold for Jewish women. And I think that it just begins with owning that voice inside of us, not locking ourselves away, and trusting and recognizing that yes, it may just be potential right now. Yes, there's risk in taking action on that potential. Yes, whenever we go out and start to work with this balancing act of not just being singularly focused, yes, there's risk involved, but our voices are so needed. Our voices are so unique, every single one of us. And I don't think all women have the same collective voice. We each have a different one. Every single woman has a different voice, a different flavor, a different self, a different power to give to the world. And when we all step into that power, world, watch out. If you feel a resonance with this character of Dina, if it feels like that person that we are describing, that's either a small or large part of who I am, take the risk and own that voice and recognize that the world needs you. The world needs your beautiful, unique voice, point of view, perspective, talent, influence, leadership, perspective on Torah, on your Judaism. We need it. We want it. Your real pneumistic internal self, who you truly are, having the courage to reflect that in an external way, letting your internal work be seen by others, that is going to shift the world. Kol kvuda basmalach panima means I walk out into the world. I'm not hidden. I'm not hidden away. I'm not quiet. I am not silenced. I am out in the world. I have a voice, and I do it in a way that is pnima, that is internal, that is clearly a reflection of a soul, l'shem shamayim, for the sake of heaven, with a clear sense of who this is oriented towards, of why I'm doing this, of why I'm showing up, to be a channel for the divine, to influence the people around me, to move this world towards a beautiful state of redemption. We have always been the ones leading the Jewish people towards redemption. This time will not be different. It is us finding our voices, stepping out of the shadows, walking out of our homes, trusting that we have something to offer to the world that is going to bring this world to the ultimate state of redemption. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next time.
אלוקיי זכיננה בתורתך ובמצוותיך לחבר את נשמתי תמיד אליך לחבר תמיד אליך